The Mediterranean sun painted the sky with a molten gold hue as it began its descent, casting a warm glow over the impossibly sleek lines of the Aphrodite's kiss. A $300 million floating palace moored just beyond the sparkling coastline of Monaco. The yacht was a marvel of modern decadence. Multiple helipads, infinity pools on every deck, a glass-bottomed ballroom, and a private AI-controlled nightclub that adjusted music to the guests' biometric feedback. Onboard was the kind of crowd that moved markets and broke the internet with a single post. Influencers, tech titans, billionaires, heirs, and heiresses to fortunes older than entire nations. Chuck Norris stood at the base of the boarding ramp, his silhouette unmistakable against the glare of the sea. He wasn't wearing designer labels or a linen suit tailored in Milan. He wore jeans, a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled, and scuffed leather boots that had walked across more continents than most of the partygoers had ever flown over. His hair was windswept, his beard neat, and his eyes, calm, sharp, unreadable, scanned the yacht like a soldier entering hostile territory. The invitation had arrived a week earlier, sent by courier and signed in stylized digital ink by Damien Vexford himself. The 29-year-old tech god, whose AI-driven social commerce empire had made him the youngest man on the planet to own both a private moon pod and a fleet of autonomous supercars. The note had been simple. Chuck, come join the future. We're rewriting the rules. He had no intention of fitting in. That wasn't his style. But the idea of watching the sea roll by, bourbon in hand, while a self-absorbed crowd yammered about crypto collapses and luxury NFT art amused him. The moment he stepped on deck, Chuck felt it, a subtle but unmistakable shift in energy. Heads turned, but not in admiration or awe. They turned with smirks, with half-suppressed laughs, with confusion. A tan model with a surgically sculpted face leaned toward her influencer friend and muttered, "Isn't that the roundhouse kick guy? From like forever ago." Her friend raised an eyebrow, chewing absently on a piece of imported papaya. "Oh yeah, my dad used to post those memes. Didn't he punch the moon or something?" Chuck passed them without acknowledgement. He was used to whispers, but this wasn't respect. It was mockery wearing silk. Damien approached, shirt unbuttoned to the waist, exposing a chest oiled to perfection. He held a martini in one hand and had his other arm wrapped around a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of Fashion Week hologram. "Chuck," he said with the bright, overeager tone of someone pretending to be surprised. "Man, I wasn't sure you'd actually show. I figured you were too old school for this crowd." Chuck offered a small nod. Didn't realize age came with a guest limit. The people around Damien laughed, but not with Chuck. They laughed at him. "Still sharp," Damien said, barely hiding the smirk. "Come on, I'll show you around." He didn't introduce Chuck as a legend. Not as a martial arts icon. Not a man who'd served his country, performed his own stunts, or taken down entire armies on screen with one squint. Instead, he gestured vaguely and said, "This is Chuck. He's retro." The tour was more performance than hospitality. Chuck was shuffled past the yacht's AI-powered garden, the water jet racing drones, the climate-controlled cigar dome, each time hearing some version of "Bet you've never seen this before. Huh, cowboy?" At dinner, things turned from awkward to downright humiliating. He was guided, intentionally, not to the grand main table where the elite were seated beneath a chandelier made of diamond dust and light projections, but to a small circular table at the far edge of the lower deck. Seated beside him were a bored teenager with a gaming addiction and a 6-year-old sipping organic apple juice from sippy cup. "Looks like you'll be more comfortable here," Damien said, pretending not to notice the laughter around him. Throughout the evening, the jabs kept coming. When Chuck tried to join a conversation about emerging threat detection systems, one guest interrupted with, "You still dealing with fax machines?" Or, "Did you finally figure out email?" Someone brought him a prune juice and winked. When Chuck walked past the hot tub area, a woman with metallic lips whispered, "Yacht rule number 1, no dads allowed in the wet zones." It got worse. The yacht's DJ, who doubled as an influencer with a 2 million-strong following, played a remix titled "Roundhouse to Retirement," a techno loop of old Chuck Norris jokes over a distorted beat. The crowd roared with laughter. Even the crew seemed in on it. subtly guiding Chuck away from popular areas, seating him in the back, accidentally delaying his meals. At one point, Chuck wandered into the gym, an enormous stainless steel paradise of equipment that looked more advanced than a NASA training facility. The doors didn't open. A biometric scanner blinked red. "Sorry," said a man built like a bulldozer, wearing branded compression gear. "Reserved for actual athletes today." Chuck simply nodded, turned, and left. But while they mocked and dismissed him, Chuck watched. He saw how Damien always kept a particular briefcase by his side, handcuffed at one point during a sunset toast. He noticed the two men in suits, not guests, not crew, standing by the entrance to the command room, constantly scanning the crowd. He noted how the ship's security cameras were subtly focused not outward toward the sea, but inward toward specific guests. And there was something in the way the staff moved, tight-lipped, rehearsed, like they were working under pressure. It wasn't just arrogance. It wasn't just a rich boy's toy. Something else was happening on this yacht, and Chuck could feel it in the air like a thunderstorm rolling in over still water. He leaned against the railing at the stern of the ship as the moon began to rise, casting a silver path across the waves. Below, in the dining hall, the crowd had moved on to dancing, laughter, and flaunting their customized neural implants. No one noticed that Chuck hadn't returned. No one cared, and that was fine. He closed his eyes, the sea breeze tugging at his shirt. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He'd seen it all before: fame, ridicule, dismissals, comebacks. But what they didn't understand was that Chuck Norris didn't need to prove anything until they gave him a reason. And from the way the yacht felt, like a stage set for something much darker than egos and champagne, Chuck knew the moment was coming. They'd humiliated him today. But tomorrow? Tomorrow, they'd find out. It began just after midnight. The Aphrodite's kiss had settled into its nightly lull. The party's pulse slowed, most guests slipping into the dreamlike haze of post-indulgence. A few diehards lounged in the infinity pool on deck 4, sipping cocktails that glowed faintly with bioluminescent fruit. Others stumbled off toward their suites, their laughter softer now, their egos tired from the day's performance. Damien Vexford, though, was still very much awake. He sat in the command lounge with his inner circle, surrounded by flashing holographic readouts, gesturing animatedly at a digital globe as encrypted files streamed into his private servers via the yacht's secure satellite array. Chuck Norris sat alone on a bench at the observation deck. No one noticed him anymore. Not the crew, not the guests. He was wallpaper now. Old, silent, predictable. That suited him just fine. Until the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a brownout. A snap, like the entire ship had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Music cut off mid-beat. The pools went still. Holograms vanished into thin air. The engines died. Silence swallowed the yacht, followed by the panicked murmurs of tech-dependent elites realizing they'd lost signal, power, and control all at once. Then came the klaxon, a low, mechanical bellow not programmed by any luxury system on board. And finally, the voice. Distorted, cold, broadcast over the yacht's entire internal speaker network. This vessel is now under new ownership. Stay calm, and no one gets hurt. Chuck stood instantly. From the shadows of the surrounding sea, 3 high-speed attack skiffs appeared like sharks. No lights, no flags, just matte black hulls cutting through water with deadly precision. Grappling cables shot through the air, clamping onto the upper decks. Within seconds, masked figures in tactical gear boarded with terrifying efficiency, like they'd practiced this exact operation dozens of times. The guests screamed. Some ran. Most froze, paralyzed by disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not on this yacht, not to them. A few tried to pull up security protocols on their neural links, but found only static. The intruders had blocked everything. Chuck moved, quietly, quickly, before anyone could see him. He ducked into a service corridor, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashing it against a vent panel, peeling back the metal like a sardine can. He disappeared inside as the ship erupted into chaos behind him. On the main deck, armed men corralled the guests with ruthless efficiency. The crew was forced to the floor. Damien, white-faced but trying to look composed, was yanked from his lounge chair and dragged toward the bridge. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he barked, his voice cracking. One of the hijackers removed his helmet, a tall, wiry man with eyes like frozen steel and a faint scar running from temple to chin. "Yes," he replied. "That's why we're here." The briefcase, the one Damien had refused to let go of since the party began, was ripped from his wrist. A metal cutting tool sliced through the handcuff. Inside the case, a single, sleek data core, glowing faintly with pulsing light. "This doesn't concern your guests," the leader said, motioning to his team. "Secure the ship, kill the feed, and scan every room. If anyone resists, silence them." Chuck crawled through the vent system like a ghost. He wasn't the man he used to be. That much was true. But years of fighting didn't leave you. They just waited, patient and quiet beneath the surface. He exited the duct in the laundry area, empty and dark. He grabbed a towel, soaked it, wrapped it around his hands. No weapons? No problem. A few housekeeping tools, a wrench, a carving fork from the kitchen. Makeshift, sure, but in Chuck's hands, they were something else entirely. The yacht's power remained down, emergency lighting casting red glows in narrow corridors. Guests were herded into the ballroom and zip-tied to lounge chairs and bars. Their tech was confiscated. Anyone who screamed too loud was gagged. Chuck's absence hadn't yet been noticed. He wasn't important enough until he made himself known. The first attacker went down without a sound. Chuck emerged from the dark behind him, grabbing him in a chokehold and slamming his head into the steel bulkhead hard enough to drop him instantly. Chuck pulled the man into a closet, stripped the gear, and suited up. Now he had body armor, a comms earpiece, a sidearm, and surprise. He moved like smoke through the decks, listening, calculating, picking them off one at a time, each takedown silent, brutal, efficient. He didn't waste time with quips. No flashy stunts. No poses. Just precision. In the ballroom, guests were starting to panic. One woman fainted. An old oil tycoon muttered about calling his lawyer, to which a masked man responded with a backhand that left teeth on the floor. The leader stood near the bar, loading the data core into a portable transfer unit. "The download will be complete in 7 minutes," he said to his team. That's when the first explosion hit, not from a bomb, but from a wine rack being kicked outward with the force of a battering ram. Glass and Merlot sprayed everywhere as Chuck Norris stormed into the room, half in tactical gear, half in denim, eyes locked on the leader. For a split second, no one moved, and then chaos broke. Chuck was a blur. He flipped the table to block incoming fire, grabbed a fallen rifle, and fired a precise burst that hit the control panel near the entrance, locking the room down. The guests ducked, screamed, scrambled for cover. 3 of the masked hijackers charged him at once. The first went down from knee to the solar plexus, followed by a spin kick that shattered his helmet. The second got a roundhouse, so clean his body did a full pirouette before collapsing. The third pulled a blade. Chuck disarmed him with a wrist lock that snapped tendons like twigs, then used the man's own knife to cut the zip ties off a guest. The leader cursed, ducking behind the bar, trying to finish the data transfer. "Kill him. Kill him now." Chuck dove behind an overturned couch as bullets shredded the walls. He tossed a wine bottle. It smashed into a goon's visor, blinding him long enough for Chuck to slide in and deliver a 3-punch combo that ended with the man crashing through a glass table. The countdown on the data transfer read 48 seconds. Chuck rose, gun drawn, and moved. Not rushed, precise. Like time bent to accommodate him. He vaulted the bar and faced the leader. They stared at each other, both armed. "You're a fossil," the leader spat. Chuck said nothing. He fired one shot, not at the man, but at the device. The data core sparked. The unit hissed. And just like that, the download was gone. The man lunged. Chuck sidestepped, elbowed him in the throat, and slammed him headfirst into the marble countertop. He slumped, out cold. Silence fell. The guests blinked, stunned, staring at the wreckage, at Chuck, bloodied, breathing hard, still standing. One influencer whispered, "Holy is that? The Chuck Norris?" Someone else muttered, "I thought he was a joke." Chuck looked around at the crowd, the disbelief, the raw, on faces that had mocked him just hours ago. He holstered the pistol and said, "Now you know." Dawn broke over the Mediterranean with a soft blush, casting warm hues across the decks of the Aphrodite's Kiss. The yacht rocked gently in the calm sea, but the serenity was a stark contrast to the wreckage inside. Shattered glass crunched beneath the boots of Monaco's maritime special forces as they swept the ship for any remaining threats. A sleek black chopper hovered above the helipad, its blades slicing the air with mechanical precision, lowering a cleanup team in suits and mirrored visors. Chuck Norris stood at the edge of the deck, leaning against the railing. His knuckles were bruised. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a line of dried blood traced down his forearm. He didn't flinch as another explosion echoed below deck, a team breaching a locked room, late to the party. He sipped from a paper cup of stale black coffee handed to him by a wide-eyed crew member. No one offered him prune juice now. Behind him, the guests sat under sun umbrellas, wrapped in blankets, sipping water, and blinking like they'd just emerged from a dream. Their designer clothes were wrinkled, smeared with grime and fear. Not a single selfie was taken. Damien Vexford, draped in a cashmere blanket and clutching the now-damaged briefcase like a lifeline, sat on a lounge chair under armed guard. His ego looked smaller in the daylight. A man in a sharp Navy uniform stepped onto the deck. Commander Olivier Marchand, lead investigator of the Interpol Cybercrime Task Force. He approached Chuck directly. "You were the first to respond?" Olivier asked, flipping through a digital notepad. Chuck didn't answer right away. He took another sip. "I was the only one who wasn't on the Wi-Fi." Olivier blinked, then cracked a rare smile. The hijackers were professionals. Ex-military. Some mercenaries on the payroll of a digital black market ring. We've been tracking them for months. We believe they were after something experimental. Chuck glanced at Damien. "Mr. Vexford," Olivier continued, raising an eyebrow, "has declined to say what was on that data core. Classified, he claims. Corporate research." Chuck said nothing. He already knew better. The night before, just after the chaos had settled and the last attacker had been zip-tied to a stair railing, Chuck had pulled Damien aside. The man had been a stuttering mess, face pale, his usual arrogant sheen stripped clean. "It wasn't just data," Damien had whispered. "It was AI infrastructure, bleeding-edge, self-evolving intelligence. Not your everyday chatbot. This thing learns, adapts, without limits. I was going to sell access to the highest bidder. Nation-states, private arms dealers, maybe even deep state players. But only digitally, you know? Nothing that would actually harm people." Chuck had stared at him. "You built a thinking weapon," he said. Damien looked around, panicked. "It was for leverage. Power. You don't get to be number one anymore by just making apps. You've got to be a god, or they eat you alive." Chuck had walked away. Now, in the morning light, that truth hung heavy in the air. Olivier pocketed his notepad. "You saved these people, Mr. Norris. Some of them may never admit it, but it's on record. They owe you their lives." Chuck turned back to the sea. They didn't need saving. They needed a wake-up call. A hush fell over the deck as one by one, the guests started to approach. Not with mockery, not with memes or jokes. With humility. The same influencer who had called him the meme guy now stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself like a child. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything. We didn't know." Chuck didn't respond. A burly man, the same one who had barred him from the gym, walked up with his head bowed. "I thought you were just an old story," he mumbled. "Turns out you're still the headline." Damien himself stood slowly and walked over, flanked by two guards. "I underestimated you," he said, looking like the words burned. "I made a show out of disrespect, and you still saved my life." Chuck looked at him. "Didn't do it for you." Damien nodded once, tightly. "Still, if there's anything I could do, money, PR, rebuilding your brand, name it." Chuck chuckled dryly. "You still think this was about clout?" He started to walk past him, then paused. "If you want to do something useful," he added, "destroy the AI. Not just the data, the backups, the framework, every scrap." Damien hesitated. "You know what that technology's worth?" "Yeah," Chuck said, "exactly what it almost cost everyone on this boat." Later, As the yacht slowly powered back up and the crew began prepping to return to Monaco, Chuck found his way to the same quiet bench where he'd been humiliated just 24 hours earlier. Now, people gave him space, not out of fear but reverence. Respect. A younger guest, maybe in his late 20s, approached cautiously and sat a few feet away. "Hey," he said, his voice unsure. "I know everyone's been apologizing, but I wanted to say something different." Chuck glanced sideways, listening. "When you got mocked yesterday," the young man continued, "you didn't fight back. You didn't yell or show off. You just watched, like you were waiting for something." Chuck nodded. "Always am." The man paused. "How'd you know something was coming?" Chuck took a long moment before answering. "Because when people get too loud, too rich, too proud, something always comes." The man was quiet after that. As the yacht turned slowly back toward the harbor, a breeze rolled in, soft, fresh, alive with the scent of salt and possibility. Chuck stood, stretched his back with a quiet grunt, and adjusted the cuffs of his flannel. He walked toward the landing pad, where a helicopter was waiting to take him off the yacht. Not because he asked, but because the crew insisted. As he passed the remaining guests, many stood. Some clapped. He didn't smile. He didn't pose. But as he stepped onto the chopper and the rotors began to spin, Chuck Norris turned back just once and said, loud enough for them to hear over the wind, "Next time you see a legend, don't wait for him to save your life before you believe it." Then he was gone, into the sky, into the sunrise, leaving behind the wreckage, the remorse, and a yacht full of people who would never underestimate him again. Not because of what he did, but because of who he still was.